Okay, so my goal today is to teach you some mobility exercises that are specifically going to open up your hips and increase flexibility and range of motion in the squat, as well as open up chest, shoulders, so that you can also increase your range of motion on front rack position and overhead position. I'm gonna apologize in advance. I am obviously at my gym right now, so my boss is training somewhere right now, so if that's going on in the background, don't worry about it. The first stretch I'm going to show you is not actually a stretch, it is a mobilization for the hip capsules. It is a hip capsule opener, and what this is doing is restoring space inside of the hip socket for the head of your femur to have proper space to move around in there. This is a good stretch to do anytime before you squat, or if you've been in a car for a long time, sitting at a desk for a while, and you're starting to experience like pinching in the front of your hips, or just general tightness anywhere, whether that's in the front of the hip socket or more around the back towards the glute med. This has been a lifesaver for me. I used to have huge problems with my hips, and this was the stretch that fixed them. And I keep saying stretch, but it's not really a stretch. It's an application of pressure using the head of your femur into the inside of the joint capsule in order to restore space to that joint, allowing fluid to come back in there and kind of like re-lubricate some stuff. So it is going to feel a little bit like a glute stretch, but the key is going to come not from stretching the muscles, but from applying the pressure to the inside. So here's what the setup for that is going to look like. First, you're just going to come down into tabletop position here, where you're completely squared up, hands underneath shoulders, knees underneath hips, and then we're going to start stretching the right hip first. So depending on whatever hip you're stretching, you're just going to simply bring the knee of that leg to the midline, so just bringing it from hip width to like in line with your belly button. Then you're going to use the opposite leg, so this one here, my left leg, to rotate that other leg up to 90 degrees as high as you can. So you'll see I just use my knee as the pivot point, and if I turn myself sideways, this is now the position I have myself in. And then you're simply going to start to sink back into that hip, like you're trying to shove the head of your femur outside the back diagonal of your butt. So applying all of the force from sinking back through the leg, not from pressing yourself back with the upper body. And as that starts to release, you can walk the hands forward a little bit more. So the starting position, if I do it on the other leg again, would be midline with the knee, rotate it up 90 degrees, locking it in place with the other leg, knee at the ankle, sinking back on that hip, okay? And then walking my arms forward as it starts to release. And you're thinking like you're scooping the head of the femur into the hip socket, scooping my hips back. So from the side, that scooping motion, this is not scooped, this is scooped, so not scooped, scooped, almost like you're digging out the space inside of the hip socket. So before you do this stretch, check your squatting range of motion. A lot of the times people are going to feel like really stiff before they've opened up, experiencing pinching in the front of the hip flexor, and then they'll do this stretch, and everything will magically be a million times better, especially if you've got one hip that's like dropping down further than the other. A lot of people, their hips sit more so like this when they squat, and one's higher than the other. And you can do that stretch for like a minute or so on each side, and then just switching sides for a total of like 3 minutes on each leg or so. So obviously the stiffer you are, the more time you're gonna need to spend on it. But if you make that a normal part of your routine, like I'm talking like multiple times a day when you're initially starting, that is going to work wonders in the long run for your hips. So next stretch is gonna be a runner's lunge. Don't quite need to add that yet. Which is also gonna help open the hips to the side to make room for the pelvis to drop down when you're squatting. So this is similar to a pigeon stretch being where you're completely 90 degrees bent here with the leg forward, versus a runner's lunge where your front leg is gonna come forward, you're gonna sink the hips. Now you're starting to feel the stretch in the hip flexor on opposite leg. The key here is to roll the bent leg to the outside. You reposition this camera a little bit so we can see what I'm doing here. Just gonna lower this guy down because we're gonna be on the ground. Okay, so once we're down in the runner's lunge, then the knee that is bent forward is gonna roll to the outside, and you actually want to let this foot that is forward also roll to the outside. So not keeping our foot on the floor, actually letting ourselves come up on the side of the foot. And then you're just gonna shift your body weight forward so that most of the pressure is applied to the deepest part of your glute. And you'll kind of just have to figure out where your sweet spot is. So spend some time in like 3 different points of this stretch. Here, a little bit further backwards, right in line with the hip socket, weight evenly distributed across this plane, and then shove forward even a little bit more, okay? And obviously, this stretch is gonna be intense, so I'm super flexible, so I can come down all the way, but a lot of people can do this stretch, and if you're right here, that's fine. And then also doing the exact same thing on the opposite leg. So again, we're bringing that leg straight forward in the lunge, resting the back leg on the knee, rotate to the outside, kind of let the leg just fall, and then dropping down. And making sure that you're not activating any muscles on the leg that is on the outside. Don't flex your glutes or anything. Just let this guy fall open and use the weight of your body to then press the head of the femur down into the hip socket. So the stretch you did before this was like scooping areas out of the tight areas out of the hip socket. This one is now pressing it out to the side, okay? So just creating more space for fluid to enter the joint, lubricate those areas, and restore suppleness to all the matrices of tissues that are involved there. So those would be like your 2 main mobility stretches that I would recommend specifically for the hips for squatting. Now we're going to get a little bit more into the secondary muscle groups that are involved with squatting, like quads, hamstrings, because if those guys are tight as well, it is also going to interfere heavily with your squat. So I know you said that you have done a variation of the couch stretch. Continue to do that. Anything that is going to back up we go. Anything that is going to stretch your hip flexors here is a good bet. So classic lunging, sinking the hips down. You want to make sure that when you are in this position, that your torso is upright and back, chest is open, and we're not falling over the front of the leg. Okay, so we're up 90 degrees. And then in order to get a super, super deep stretch in that hip flexor that's down, so actually let me go ahead and switch sides. In the hip flexor that's down, you want to make sure that you're squeezing your glutes on this back leg the entire time. Because activating the posterior chain on this back leg, so through your glutes and your hamstrings, is going to shut off overactive hip flexors in the front of your leg and allow those to actually stretch, actually open up. And then you can toy around with your toe positioning on the back leg. You see how I'm mostly straight up and down on my back leg right now, letting the toe fall to the outside. So now my big toe is pointed out and away from me. And as I sink down, that gets a little bit deeper into the groin, which if like your inner thighs are tight, obviously that's not going to allow you to widen your hips enough to get down into deep squat. So people will wind up squatting like here because they can't open up here. Make sense? And then just toying around with different angles of that stretch. So a lot of times when I do this, I get down to the hip flexor stretch, and then I'll just rotate the back leg so that I can sink down and stretch the inner thigh. So again, that looks like here, rotate and sink and stretch into the inner thigh. So there's that one, and then couch stretch as well for the quads. And for you, if you have very impaired flexibility in the quads and this stretch is just way too intense for you, then I'm going to recommend foam rolling and getting a lacrosse ball on your legs very, very regularly. You probably have some adhesions like scar tissue that has built up in there, and I'm guessing your IT bands are also very tight as well, which we will get to. But building off of hips, main movers, passive or secondary muscle groups, quads, glutes, hamstrings, and then into the stabilizing mechanisms like your IT band. Treating all of those because those are all involved in squatting, lunging, any type of bending movement. So setting up for the couch stretch, something soft under your knee, making sure that you are completely up against the wall with the shin, gently bringing the other leg forward, and coming up slowly. I do this stretch regularly so I can get pretty deep into it, but you don't just want to bend your body up, you want to also think about dropping the hip, okay? So letting the pelvis sink forward into that hip flexor, down into the front of the quad, and then as that starts to release, you'll rotate away across the leg that is bent. So now we're here. And on the other side, same thing, coming up nice and slow, and you can ease your way up. So as your body starts to release through this stretch, you'll be able to come up a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further, and then rotating across the opposite leg that is bent away from the one that is on the wall. And here it's important not to let your shoulders come up. Here you want to keep everything nice and drop down so that your weight is sinking forward into the pelvis and really forcing depth into that stretch as much as possible. Other ways to stretch the quads are if you are in pigeon pose here, simply reaching back and grabbing a back leg and pulling it up. So that would look like this, pigeon pose, reach back, grab the leg, pull it up. And the important one here is to not let that hamstring fire. So make sure that your leg is completely relaxed before you reach back for your leg. Otherwise, your hamstring will cramp up in that position. And I promise you that is the least fun thing that could ever happen to anyone. Okay, so drills also to improve your squatting. There's a chance that your squat form just needs to be readjusted a little bit to allow you to get to a greater depth and to stop any interference from femoral head impingement or anything like that. So if you've been experiencing pain through your hips while squatting, or just feeling like you get down to a certain depth and are blocked by something, just try tweaking your stance a little bit. So a lot of people have a tendency to squat straight back from here. Okay, well now this is forcing my upper body forward. If I'm back squatting, that's just gonna bring the weight forward, and I I can't get down any lower than this. This literally is killing me right now. Super tight in the quads, lots of pinching through the front of my hip. So that's, again, in this knee position here, okay? And that's where a lot of people try to squat from. Oh my gosh. What needs to happen is the width needs to be opened just a tiny little bit through the heels. We need to think about our toe flare. So let me readjust this guy a little bit. So let's see what we're doing here. So a lot of people nowadays are afraid to squat with the toe flare. Shoot. If I can get this set up here, I will show you. So a lot of people try to not squat with the toe flare anymore, meaning they're trying to create width here with their feet, keeping the toes forward, and then creating that external rotation with the knees, like that beautiful squat that we see a bunch of famous Olympic lifters do and whatnot, where their toes are straight forward and their knees are out to the side. Well, this is doable, but it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. So if I suddenly find my width, find where I have comfortable external rotation of the knees, and then just externally rotate my toes to about a 45-degree angle, and squat from there, beautiful. Suddenly I'm at depth, I can be up straight, I can get my arms up. We're going on front rack position here, from all angles. I'm not impinged, I'm balanced, nothing's pinching in my hips. So from the side, that would be here. And it's almost like a primal, like third world country squat. But in order to find where you need to be, your proper squatting position based on the unique shape of your pelvis, you're just gonna do a drill where you come down into child's pose, just like I am now, sitting on the hips, so hips back on top of your heels, and you're gonna come down into that stereotypical yoga pose, hands forward, and the only thing that you're gonna do is widen the knees while keeping the toes together, so you'll see how my toes are together underneath my feet. Widening the hips until you can get down as far as you possibly can into this stretch. And this is where I'm at, where my hips are deepest. Then once you find that point, come up, just onto your knees. My toes are still underneath of me, and then you're simply gonna roll back onto your toes, and it should automatically create that external rotation in your toes. So your feet are gonna go from pointed in here at that angle to pointed out in the equal and opposite angle. Don't worry if they're close together, but that's gonna tell you where your toe flare is. It's like when my feet are tucked underneath my body, under my legs, they're here, and then when I bring them out, they're here. And that's at a 45-degree-ish angle, which I would then add to the space that I found in my hips. So once I found that, oh, my hips need to be this wide, then I can go, and now I know that my toes need to be rotated that far out, and that's where my best squat stance is going to be. And that's everything. I squat clean from here, I back squat, and I front squat from here. Anytime I'm doing a squatting motion, this is where I'm at. And don't be discouraged or anything if this isn't your stance. There's a ton of people, depending on the length of their femur, who are more here. Okay? It's different for everyone. Same fundamentals apply, but you have to be able to tweak those fundamentals to find what is healthiest for your skeletal anatomy. Then after you've found that position, you need to make it muscle memory, so that anytime that you're squatting down your body automatically knows the position it's trying to fall into. So what you can do is simply get yourself up against a wall, find the squat stance, flat back here, and just practice falling down into that hip movement. And I am a little bit back here, like I'm sitting, but just hang out here for a little while. Get your body used to actually being at depth and being able to support weight here. Toying with trying to press the hips further open with the elbows, so that you get used to hanging out in that range of motion, so that suddenly not only are you stable when you're standing, but you're stable at the bottom of a squat. And then as you progress with that, just graduate from the wall, do it freestanding, then start adding a little bit of weight. Do it with a barbell. Do it with a barbell and 2 10-pound plates until you work up to being able to squat comfortably. And you can just do a set of like 20 air squats every night so that your body gets used to operating within that full depth, within that full range of motion, and take your time with it. So if you have to struggle for a little bit at first, I don't just want you to crank them out. If you can't do it, nice and slow, feel the pattern of movement all the way through it, and then come out of it. So those would be my recommended drills for squatting. There are more that we could go into, but I will save that for another day. Now we're going to go into overhead movements, restoring flexibility in this plane of motion and in this plane of motion. So the main thing I find with people who are struggling with flexibility overhead complain about shoulder inflexibility, but people need to realize that that's kind of vague, because your shoulder isn't just here. Your shoulder is the most complicated joint in the entire body because it is the most mobile. So there's a lot going on there. Like even parts of your pec, like the pec minor, inserts of the coracoid process, which is the joint up here in the base of your shoulders, where a lot of people experience like pinching if they're doing overhead movements wrong. So we're going to focus on opening up our chest, because if your chest is tight and you're pulled forward here, that's going to interfere with everything overhead. So we need to be able to open through the chest. You also need to be able to open through the lats. So if you are having issues getting your elbows up in front rack, that's going to have to do with tight teres minor under here and interserratus anterior and your lats as well. So I'm going to be doing just some like really straightforward stretches and mobilization there. The first one I'm going to show you is a lifesaver. You probably will only be able to do this at a gym because nobody owns a PVC pipe and a box of their own. If you can figure out a way to do it at home, go for it. But I just do it every single time I'm at the gym. So what you'll need is a box, something to pad the box with. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with wood burns on your elbows, and you don't want that. And let's see if I can get this in the frame a little bit better. And you're going to grab yourself a PVC pipe. So this is what the stretch is going to look like, and then I will break it down for you. And we are going to stretch teres minor into serratus anterior, which are those kind of underlying elements of scapular stability that tie in with the lats that are hard to target and that people neglect a lot, but are vital to being able to get your elbows up high enough. They tie in with the triceps as well. So you're just going to grab yourself a PVC pipe. When you set up for it, it's going to look like this. Alright? And you should feel like from here to here is just unzipping. And it might also pop your, if you're out of line with your shoulders, a lot of times what it ends up doing for me is popping the head of my humerus back into alignment within my shoulder joint. So what you're going to do with the PVC pipe is elbows together, hands wider than elbows. This is creating torque. Okay, so you want to think like you're trying to keep your elbows forced together the entire time. And that is where your elbows and hands are going to be on the box. Your knees are going to be about 1.5 feet or so back from the box. And when you round yourself forward, we're tucking our hips forward underneath of us while also rounding at the thoracic spine and tucking our head in between our elbows. So you almost want to think like there's a string tied to the base of your scapula that's pulling your entire body up. So we're not just doing this, and we're not just doing this. It's here. Okay? And then once you've found that rounded point, then you'll start to, while maintaining that rounded point, you'll start to apply pressure in your elbows, sink back onto your hips, and try to elongate the space underneath your armpit as much as possible. So I set myself up with the PVC here. Find my elbows right on the edge of the box and pull. And you'll notice I'm also bringing the PVC up close to my head. But your head shouldn't be dropping down here. It should be pulled up.
Use the right foot this time.
And depending on how tight you are, that stretch is going to get really intense really quickly. It takes a lot of strength, surprisingly, to do it. It might be a little bit difficult to do it first, but toy around with it, because once you understand how to do it and once you recognize that you found that sweet spot with it, it's also going to become one of the biggest mobility exercises in your toolbox. Going off of that one is a similar stretch to open up that front rack position. You will just get up against a wall with an elbow and sink into it. So, depending on the rotation of your body here, you can force it more so into the lats if you're completely straight, more into the teres minor. You're at a little bit of an angle, directly to the side, triceps. Hitting all of those hard to get to places underneath the arm. Do this anytime that you have to get into front rack position. Snatching overhead, really anything. Just do this all the time. And obviously spending equal time on both sides. So all that I was doing here was bringing my elbow up above the head and then sinking down into it as much as I can. And toying around with the angle. So that is that one. Next is going to be a variation of child's pose to stretch the lats. So you're simply going to come down into child's pose. Use the widened hip position for your squat, child's pose, and then you're just going to spend time crawling your hands out as far as possible and walking them to the side to open up through the lats, okay? So walk your hands into the deepest stretch that you can find forward, and then translate that to the side. Sinking your body weight into the outside arm. And you should feel that stretch from here all the way up. Toy around with rotating your body into it a little bit, like you're coming up and opening. And then same thing on the other side. Opening into the lat.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Judah Freeland. What a new call.
And it's very important in all of these stretches not to hold your breath. Breathing will help the muscle groups relax and actually release themselves. Okay, so now we're going to move into using some accessory tools to help break up muscle tightness, joint tightness. So we're going to utilize a foam roller and a lacrosse ball. Plenty of work that you can get done just with those. So we'll kind of just start back at the hips again and then work our way up.